Listen up, chairs talking.
Okay, so we're going to open the meeting this time. And the RTCO acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Okanagan peoples that have resided here since time immemorial. We recognize, honor, and respect the Okanagan lands on which we live, work, and play.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been asked to give introductions and then start off the meeting here. So I'm just going to go around the table here so everybody understands who's here. From the committee, we've got Dwayne Johansson, I beg your pardon. We've got Donna Green, Daryl Hordo. We've got our electoral director, Wayne Carson. We've got Kerry Cook, our vice chair, Josh Galloway, our chair, Scott Graham, Kaylee Simpson, another committee member, Eric Dennerson, and Brian. Brian is an Arquilla or Aquila?
Aquila, Italian.
Aquila, okay, not Spanish. Okay, Brian Aquila. Okay. Online, we've got Colin Kopp, and we've also got David Van Omen from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Hi, David. Hi, Colin. And then from the consulting team, we've got Brianna Wells, we've got Sherry Hurst, and my name is Alan Nielsen. Can you hear us online? Yep.
Yep, we can, I can hear you certainly.
Absolutely. request and we make a motion that is temporary, that Electoral Area West and Northwest Side governance and service study committee agenda be adopted. Josh was moved it and Dwayne seconded. Also, we need to adopt the minutes. Need a motion that the Electoral Area West and Northwest Side Government Services Study Committee meetings minutes of July 20th, 2022 be adopted. We want to move that?
Second.
Josh, second. Discussion item.
Excellent. We have, Mr. Chair, we have some written submissions to the committee, 2 submissions that are in the agenda package. And I think we put them there because the committee is very transparent. We want to make sure that everything gets into the committee minutes and into the report and appendices. So I would ask that the chair request a motion to receive these.
Yes, so I need a motion to receive the submissions from Jim Edgerton. And Carrie. And all in favor?
And then, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'll kind of kick off with 4.2 there and on the governance and service study purpose. And thank you, committee members, for all of the time we've put in thus far. This is the final meeting of the committee, and it's been a long process, and you've really, if I can say so without sounding at all kind of I don't know, inappropriate, you put in a tremendous amount of time and effort. So thank you very much for your effort and your attention throughout. We've got the final meeting, as I mentioned. Let's just try to, oh, okay. Not working there, so.
Correct. Technical issues.
Yep, just a few technical issues here.
So it's changing on there, but it's not changing on there. Yeah. So maybe it's cool. No, that's not it. There's the, okay, so it's on the slideshow already. So then how long is this mouse? Let's just see if the mouse changes at all. Okay, the mouse does it. Okay. So it's just, so what if we, let's put this where that is.
Sandy, you are standing on a plug there.
Yeah, that's, I think we're okay there. Okay, there we go.
Is that working?
Yep. Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I was mentioning, we are here for the final meeting of the committee, and we'll just go through a little bit about the purpose again. We always start these meetings with a reminder to the committee, to the community of the bigger picture, as it were, the purpose of this study and how it fits into that bigger picture. And then we'll go on and talk a little bit about the report that we have in the committee agenda package that we'll be spending some time on this evening. So let's just start first of all, and just remember that the governance and services study, which we're now engaged, is the first phase of what could be that broader process. You've seen these slides before. This is the slide that identifies where we are now in this broader process. The regional district having requested the study, this committee having been formed. Options for change will be identified. We'll talk about that this evening. Depending on the committee's recommendations coming out of this evening's meeting, we'll either be looking at changes within the structure or changes to the structure, or possibly both. If there are changes recommended to the structure, then we will be looking at going to the regional district with those recommendations, and the regional district then will determine whether or not to recommend those changes to the ministry, and the ministry then will determine whether to proceed with a further study on those recommendations to the structure. So right now we are in the first phase. We're kind of at the end of that first phase. It's possible we'll be moving into a second phase, but that will depend on the recommendations the committee chooses to make and how they're received by the regional district and the ministry. This current study then, the governance and services study, has a threefold purpose, and we've seen this slide before. The first is to document and assess the current governance and services, in other words, what is in place today in North Westside, and we've done that. The second then was to engage with residents to understand the concerns as they relate to governance and services and the interests as they relate to governance and services. And you'll recall that we did that as well with our public process that ended in early August. We then, the third purpose is to identify the changes to consider. And tonight's meeting really focuses primarily on that third purpose, that final part of the purpose. Tonight, we're going to review the draft committee report. We're going to focus our time on chapters 5 and 6. We're going to consider then the options for change. Those are outlined in chapter 6, and so we'll spend most of our time on that chapter. Following our consideration of those options, we'll be looking at the committee to make a recommendation. Now, you may recall that when we started this process, we said that the committee may choose to recommend nothing or it may choose to recommend something. And so we'll look to the committee to determine whether or not you wish to make a recommendation, and if you do, whether that recommendation is to the system, within the system, or a bit of both. Moving right along, if we could, the draft report then is in front of us. This is, and you'll note that this is a report, even though we've got the consultants identified on there, this very much is the report of the committee. So this report will go forward to the regional district and to the province as a committee report, written with the committee by the consultants, but presented as a committee report. So this is your report, really. That's why the recommendation is going to be very important for this committee to make. In the draft report, I will mention, first of all, you'll notice the keyword draft. And so we have presented this piece of work to the committee. We've also presented it to the regional district and to the province. Neither of the regional district nor the province has had a chance to kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb to identify accuracy or changes. We don't anticipate there are going to be any changes to correct accuracy. We always, though, kind of hold that out that if there's small things to change, then we will incorporate those into the final version. So I just mentioned that only because I wanted the group to know that this has gone to the ministry and to the regional district at the same time it went to the committee. Chapters 1 through 4 are things you've already seen before. So those chapters were the interim report that we saw way back at the beginning of the process. We have made some updates to those chapters based on the feedback we received from the committee back in May. So we, if you go through that and you look carefully, you'll see some of the changes that were identified by people here. We made all of those changes. Other than that, we've left it alone and we focused on chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5 reports on the public engagement, and the committee will remember that a few weeks ago, after we had completed the survey period, we sent around to committee members, as we said we would at our last meeting. We sent around to committee members a summary of the results of that public engagement. And he didn't give a summary, so yeah. Anyway, so we will just touch on that again because that summary was not public until we presented this report. So we want to make sure that it is in the record, as it were, that people in the audience have a chance to hear some of the high points. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but we'll just go through a couple of the key points. We will spend more time on chapter 6. As I mentioned, that chapter presents different options for change for the committee to consider. Chapter 7, there is no chapter 7 right now, but there will be after tonight. So chapter 7 will be very small. It will simply capture the recommendation of the committee. We have not put forward a recommendation. It's not our place to put forward the recommendation. Our place as your consultants is to provide the options, to, if you wish, to help guide some of the discussion around those options, to answer questions about the options, and then to allow the committee to make its recommendation. All right. Mr. Chair, are there any questions on that first bit before we proceed?
None from my chair.
Okay, thank you. I will pass it over to my colleague Sherry, who is going to talk about the public engagement and give us a kind of a high-level summary of the findings.
Just to go through what the process was for public engagement, just to refresh everyone's memory. public engagement opportunities that we had as part of this process began with the creation of the website that included all the committee information, all the background reports that we had, and that were brought forward to the committee, minutes, meetings. So all that information was provided on the website. We also mailed out the overview that was prepared, that's on that slide. That was mailed out to all the households on the northwest side. They were also available at our open houses. We held 4 open houses. We also had a feedback form or a survey that was available both at the open houses, but it was also available online. So even if you didn't attend the open house, you could still fill out the survey. We had 89 responses to the feedback form or the survey as part of the engagement process. On the open houses, we had 4 of those. I'll just touch on a few of the highlights. I mean, we had, I know that committee members attended, so you remember, but we had sort of an informal period to each one where we had poster boards around the room. People could look at the poster boards, read what the study was about, ask questions from committee members, ask questions from the consultants. And then we had a presentation and generated some discussion with those who were at the meetings. So in those meetings, that we've highlighted in the report just a few of the themes that came out from those open houses specifically. So the sort of service concerns that came up, probably not a big surprise, fire protection was probably the most common raised concerns, but we also heard a little bit about water services, garbage services, emergency response. Heard quite a bit about local roads. It's not a regional district service, but we did hear concerns about the local roads in the area. Planning, building permits, and a lot of talk about the need for transparency regarding service delivery and service costs. On the governance side and governance discussions or decision-making discussions that we had during the open houses, we heard a lot about a desire to increase the role and influence of the electoral area director from this area, and having a greater influence over decisions for local services here. The concern about the regional district's voting rules and the influence from the municipalities in decisions for the services for this area. I guess that wanting to look into the costs and benefits of the changes, in particular, possibly of joining the RDNO. And really that sort of affinity for and relationship with the Vernon area and the fact that a lot of people get their services from there. So those are some of the things that we heard raised in our open houses. The survey forms, you'll know, and Alan touched on that, we did receive a more comprehensive compilation of the results, including those pages of all the details of the written responses that people gave. And we're very thankful for receiving all of those. And it's really important that all the committee has the opportunity to read through all of it and really hear everything, and for people to know that the committee was able to hear everything that they put down in those. So that's why we don't just touch on the highlights, we do give you all of the responses. But just to give you the highlights here, because it would take too long to go through. From those feedback, we heard about an interest in receiving more services in this area. There was a fairly high perception that people, or from the respondents, again, just an indicator from the larger community, there is only 89 responses. Those people indicated that they did not feel they received good value for their taxes for regional district services. There were lower satisfaction ratings for services like fire protection and emergency planning. Local roads probably have the lowest ratings of satisfaction. People indicated that they shared common interests with areas outside the RDCO. So again, that touches on that relationship with areas in the regional district of North Okanagan. On the governance side, and those questions that sort of were more on the decision making, we heard that people thought that there was insufficient input from their director. There was a desire for more advisory committees and more local input. There was a very high preference for local decisions made by Northwest Side residents. There was a concern with the Kelowna's control over represented in the current system. Again, some of the written themes, services, fire protection, again, came up, that was really the highest rated. There was a lot of concern for fire protection and safety, local roads, and then some of those other issues we heard again, like garbage, water, planning, building permits, some of those again. On the government side, again, those the same sort of issues came up as we heard in the open houses, so the composition of the board and really that responsiveness to local northwest side concerns. The other thing, as part of our public engagement, we did have some additional feedback, so that is included in appendices in the report, and that includes the letter that was brought forward from the chair and the vice chair, who were really communicating concerns that they heard from other residents and sort of compiling those into a letter. As well as the other two submissions we have from the town. So that's what we, a quick version of what we heard. Yeah, sorry, any questions on anything that we, or that you saw, and you guys saw the more comprehensive summary of the responses, any surprises, any questions about?
I'm actually quite surprised because one of the main things I hear about all the time is schools. Schools didn't seem to be that high up.
Yeah, we did.
Because I know that's
have-
been a consistent thing over the years. It's always been about which direction they're sending their kids.
Right. We did hear a little bit about schools and a little bit about busing of schools, but yeah, it wasn't quite as, definitely not as high as roads. Parks. Yeah, parks are in there, but we can hear, yeah. I mean, you know, some specific, like this trail or this, but not, certainly not not the top three.
Any other comments? Just one. If the process does indeed advance, will there be further opportunity for public engagement through those platforms? Because I think during the summer, a lot of folks are just not around. And 89 is not a large number from the passion and interest in this community. So yeah, hopefully, if there's a broader scope and spectrum, there'd be further opportunity, maybe outside of a summer season.
Right. And depending on what the committee recommends, for sure. If
Exactly,
there is, yeah, if the process continues, then for sure there will be engagement to any future component.
Excellent.
Maybe if I may, Mr. Chair, one point, it's a really, Brian's raised an excellent question in reference to the number of respondents. I was curious to see how 89 kind of measured up against some other surveys we know of in the central Okanagan. I did look to see that the city of Kelowna, West Kelowna, did its most recent citizens survey. They got 218 responses. And so that's a 39,000 people. So that's 35,000 people. So, and whereas Kelowna, when it did this latest one, I think got about 400. So it's 89 isn't maybe as high as the committee would wish, but it's
High per capita compared to those. Other two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
How was your responses to this sort of thing in Langley?
We did. Well, let's see now. We did. Do you recall how many we got up there? Because
Yeah, but I probably get it before.
we'll get it before the end of the meeting. We'll get it in real time.
I just wondered whether or not we were comparable with that. I know they have a bigger population.
Yeah, and there were the two studies, of course. There was the governance study back in 2017, and then the more recent one. But if we look at the governance study, we have a look at that. Sure. Yes.
Yeah, and the longer, I mean, as the process goes on, people get more and more, especially when it starts to get into having to vote or whatever. But I think if you compare to the governance study, it probably wasn't that different.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Wayne, it was a much bigger population. And it was a longer period that didn't only restrict it to the summer months too. So, yeah. So I think all in all, 89 is nothing to sneeze at before we hit it. Yeah.
And we haven't touched the wall, so.
And then there you go. Yes.
No,
That's right. Yes. I mean, yeah, people do tend to take more interest when there's money on the line. Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Shall we move on then? We are in record time here. So, okay, let's, let's move on if we could then. I am going to pick up and actually both Sherry and I are going to talk about chapter 6 now, the options to consider. And this chapter deals with two categories, two groups of options. The options are laid out in the text themselves, as you know, and also then in appendix 7 at the end of the, appendix 8 of the department. 7 or 8, one of the appendices at the back. Yes, which is appendix 7. Thank you. Appendix 7, right at the back. But we'll go through and talk about them and just outline a few of the pros and cons of those kinds of things. We are going to talk about two different types of options, and these are the two that we refer to throughout our study process. The first type deals our options or changes that would occur within the existing framework. And when we say within the existing framework, what we mean is kind of within the system in which Northwest Side is a part of Central Okanagan West electoral area within the Central Okanagan Regional District. That's the within the existing framework. So we look at changes we can make without changing the boundary or structure of the electoral area and without changing the boundary or structure of the regional district. Options to consider changes to the existing framework are options, and there are fewer of them, that look at changing kind of the number or the shape or the size of the region of the electoral area in which we're located, and the actual regional district as well, changing the boundary of the regional district to exclude Northwest Side from our DCO and put it into a different regional district, our DNO. So we'll talk about these and go through and kind of highlight some of the key differences between the options and how they may be effective or perhaps not as effective as you might wish to deal with some of the issues. And when we think about those issues, as Sherry pointed out in her summary of the public feedback, and as we've talked about in some other contexts as well, we're really looking at some issues related to current services, fire is mentioned, and a few others, and some issues related to the degree of local influence in decision-making for the Northwest Side. So those are some of the issues that we're trying to address as we go through and think about these options. Let's start within the framework. The first one we'll talk about is, oh, there we go, oops, okay. Okay, we'll start with the Citizen Advisory Committee, and I'll ask Sherry to talk about that.
Okay, the Citizen Advisory Body, so because one of the issues that was raised was this need for more community input, and indeed we actually asked a specific question about it on the feedback form, and if people were interested in having more citizen committees, and we heard fairly strongly from the 89 that responded that that was something of interest. So citizen advisory bodies like committees, there's commissions, depending on how they're formed, but really provide that extra opportunity to involve residents in the process. So they can be created for specific services, like you could have a Northwest Side Fire Service Citizens Advisory Committee, or you could have a Parks Electoral Area West Parks Advisory Committee, where you like residents to participate on the committee, they discuss issues, they make recommendations, and so they are having some input into service discussions, or you can give them a broader mandate where they discuss all the Northwest Side local services, or so it doesn't have to be limited to just one service. But the key thing is that this is an advisory body. They're not making decisions, you're making recommendations. So those recommendations, often your electoral area director would sit or participate in those meetings. So they would hear from residents, hear that input, and it would really be up to them to help communicate those priorities then to the board. But an advisory body can make recommendations to the board, but they're not making decisions. So that's kind of the pros and cons. It does involve residents more. It involves them in learning about those services, in discussing the issues of those services, and communicating local priorities. But the downside is that this isn't translating into local decision-making authority. It's just input into the process. So that is one option that we included.
Just for clarification, the authority of the committee would be determined, the authority and scope of the committee would be determined by the regional board.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, you would create a terms of reference, and yeah, and that would be created by.
So we have to pass it through the regional board to move forward with any of it. Okay.
Make it be created as part of, yeah, from the board.
Okay, the next option we've got is one that we've talked about already in previous meetings, and that is the Electoral Area Services Committee. As we've noted in the past, RDCO is one of the few regional districts in the province that does not currently have an Electoral Area Services Committee. EASCs, the acronym for Electoral Area Service Committee, those are bodies that are created to give a separate forum for the discussion of electoral area services and for the discussion of electoral area issues and the creation of positions around those issues. They are bodies that typically involve electoral area directors, of course. In cases such as RDCO or Metro Vancouver, for example, where you have very few electoral areas, they may also involve representatives of some of the municipal members as well. So in Metro Vancouver, as an example, there are 10 members of the Electoral Area Services Committee, and those include the one electoral area director, because there's only one electoral area, and then 9 municipal directors from around the region. And so those people come together, or in the separate forum, issues that are of importance to the local service issues or local issues that are of importance to the electoral areas can be taken from the main board table, where they just don't get a lot of attention or a lot of time for proper discussion and exploration. They can be put in this separate forum. The players, the directors in that separate forum then can pass recommendations and give advice back to the regional board. So I've just noted one other point then, that these are advisory bodies. They're standing committees of the regional board, and they give advice to the board. So they don't have decision-making authority, but as a body that deals in some detail with issues and service matters that concern the electoral area, the recommendations for action that they make to the board tend to be accepted by the board in cases where electoral area services committees exist, which again is in most parts of the province. So they are considered a very effective vehicle for giving a greater role for electoral area directors in the governance system. Again, they don't make decisions, but when we think about governance, it's all about everything that goes into it, all of the framework and all the mechanisms that contribute towards the making of decisions. And advice to the regional board is one key mechanism. So this is all part of that governance model, and it gives that extra bit of influence and an extra bit of attention to the electoral area issues in that separate forum. Absolutely.
Thanks for Director Carson. Is this the same committee that we've been trying to get?
I have been working and begging for an electoral area governance committee for 2 terms at our regional district. For the first 7 years, I was absolutely stonewalled about nothing. It is under consideration this year, but there's nothing so far, and I have confidence that we're moving forward in the right direction. I really, really think that it could have changed things for us, and the recommendation that I made after talking to many other electoral areas out there at different conferences and that, is I had proposed for a number of years now that the committee be formed with 1 member from each of the 4 municipalities and both electoral area directors for a total of 6. And we would operate as an electoral area committee out of there. And again, it's an advisory committee, even in North. The electoral area committees sit together. They pass their stuff, they come up with it. It all has to go to the full board for approval. But usually something that comes from an electoral area committee is almost pretty much rubber stamped at full board, but any board member has the right to open it up and bring it to full discussion at the board. And the reasoning that I had for over the years is because right now, being a debater and argument of our community, I get to speak once every 13 times. And by the time I get around the second time, I'm taking my notes and that, I could be talking about something that we haven't talked about for 45 minutes. And the majority of the people on the board are municipal members, and they're just not interested in the electorate. I had 1 member on the board complain bitterly about the time spent on electoral areas.
So
And
it's
I've listened to that for years.
So it's an option that could have been a solution.
The chair of the board has the ability to form committees.
Okay, so it's an unsuccessful option that we've already tried.
I'm trying.
And I think, I think as Wayne mentioned, I understand there is an effort now underway, but I'm not sure where that effort is right now, but yes.
All I can say is I'm not happy.
Okay, yeah, it is, I just looking at this option kind of, at this point in time, these electoral area services committees, they are, you recall that in one of our, I think in our open houses and in some of our previous meetings, we talked about regional districts having 3 key service roles. One being kind of regional service body or regional governing body, one for sub-regional services, and then another being kind of local services, and in particular playing the role of local government for local areas. These kinds of committees are very useful at saying, we're going to kind of recognize that important local government role and put it in a separate forum where we can give it the proper attention. So anyway, we'll go on from there. That's all right. Okay. Sherry.
Well, that was a pretty good segue into to this one, which there are some things that were identified during our process that were related to services that are currently provided by the body. So we've already mentioned roads, we mentioned schools, we also heard a little bit about policing and speeding, things like that, even ambulance services. So there are those services that are provided by the province. And even though they aren't provided by the regional district, because, as Alan just mentioned, the regional district is the local government for the electoral areas, they can play a proactive role in communicating the concerns they hear from their local communities to the provincial bodies, and really setting up sort of more regular communications with bodies like Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, the RCMP, because you have services from both Vernon as well as other parts of Kelowna and West Kelowna, and communicating the local concerns to those bodies. So one of the things that we talked about is, yes, you could have separate meetings, and even though the regional district again doesn't have authority to make the changes, they can share the concerns of the community, hear back from them, then communicate them, just basically be that conduit. We did speak to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. They did indicate that they would be willing to have semi-annual meetings, even bring the main roads in to just sort of, again, you may not be changing the standards, but you would at least make sure that those concerns are being shared. So those types of advocacy roles are something that the regional district can set up, whether it be with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure or the RCMP or whatever bodies, again, they're hearing concerns from there. Oh, okay. Another opportunity we have is to make some adjustments to services, and we talked about this a little bit through our meetings, but the idea of the stakeholder votes. So those are the votes where only the participants have a vote on that service, and most of them are weighted. So we talked about the fact that these votes rarely occur the way the services are constituted. So if Electoral Area West is the only participant, then those votes never happen, and they're all done by the full board. But when there's a service that it's Electoral Area West and Electoral Area East, together those two electoral area directors can make some of the decisions for those services. So because that doesn't happen very often, the way the services are structured, it is possible to restructure some services to try and create more of those opportunities. So for instance, on community parks right now, there is a service that's Westside Parks that's only provided, the park service is only provided to Central Okanagan West. You could expand that service so it's actually providing the community park service to Central Okanagan West and Central Okanagan East. You still have kind of your own little pockets and your community parks that you're looking after, but those decisions could be made together rather than by the full board. So there could be some of those. If there are key services where there is an interest in doing so, there are some adjustments that could be made to those things. So that, yeah, the pros would be you would start to remove some of the influence of the municipalities really on those services. Yes.
Who has that decision?
Whether or not
To proceed with the.
with the amalgamation of the services, well, with, as long as you're not creating a new service, right? So if it was a service expansion, it would just be the
Restructuring the
participants, yeah.
existing service.
Exactly, then it would just be the participants that are affected by the service. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, if you were creating a new service, then it's the entire board that would be.
The entire board would,
On a new service, yes.
but
if
a
you would-
restructuring
Then it could be the participants that are involved in that service.
could be, who decides that?
Well, actually, local government out of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so if, now, in all of these things, sorry,
Yeah.
in all of, in all of these things, in all of these cases, you're going to need to have, you're going to want to have the regional district as part of the solution of this. So it would be a difficult road difficult hill to climb if the regional board were not in favor of something like this.
Because I will point out that the direction that I've taken over the years, that I think it would be pretty obvious that this would be the solution. And so far, no cases. So,
There are, I mean, and the reason why I say it might be, like, it depends on the service. There are some services that are regulatory services that involve the entire board. But on some services where it is just the electoral areas and you're expanding or changing the service area, it would be the participants.
I think that the important ones to us would be water and fire for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know that you're undertaking service reviews of those services, but those may be options that are identified as part of.
And that has been my argument in the past, that there's 6 water systems.
Yeah.
2 on the other side, 4 on this side. They all pretty much run under the same rules and regulations, the
Yeah.
same stuff and the rest of that, yet they're considered separate. And that's what takes away our stakeholders vote, and it's the same thing with fire departments.
And other regional districts have amalgamated those under an umbrella. Yeah.
To facilitate.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, yes,
As well as for financial reasons.
yes, I just haven't found the will there
Yeah.
so far.
Any other questions on that?
No, Mr. Chair, I'll just pause for a second here. We've got a few more of the within the framework changes to or options to outline. I'll just pause for a moment just to kind of state that what we are doing here is really showing kind of the menu of options available. So as you're kind of reflecting on them, as you're reading through them, you'll kind of get a sense that, okay, well, this one would kind of address some of the issues, but not all of them. This one kind of the same. And so some of them are going to have different strengths and weaknesses. As we go through these and reflect on them, when we come to thinking about a recommendation, we're going to want to kind of keep it somewhat simple. We're going to want to, I was talking with somebody earlier today and I said, you know, it's almost like if we're looking at this menu, we want to be a little bit selective and say, well, we're going to have a meal with 1 or 2. We're not going to have a smorgasbord. We're not going to say, we like all of them. Let's get them all on there. Because that's going to dilute things. It's really going to kind of kill the focus. And we want to keep it fairly simple. So as we go through here, just maybe just thinking about, well, some of these options maybe aren't as good as others and on addressing the issues that are important. And so we'll go through, we'll give the full menu. And then when we come to the recommendation, we'll get the committee to focus on the ones that they think really are going to be effective at addressing the issues that are important. Yeah,
Can I ask a very quick question?
absolutely.
So when we're thinking about these different options, the ones like, let's say the electoral area services committee that we, so that we tried in the past and hasn't had any buy-in from the RDCO. And I think I asked this question before and I don't remember the answer. If that is the recommendation that we as a governance committee puts forward, when the RDCO looks at the recommendations and everyone else, what process is in place for them to justify not going forward with that recommendation or going forward with that recommendation? Because I think that would kind of, as we look at these and we know that this has been tried and has been unsuccessful, if they don't need to provide any rationale to not move forward to that recommendation, then is it worth us picking that as one out of our selective menus when we know that they can just say X, nay, not?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very good question, and there are a couple of ways, a couple of parts to the answer. First of all, as we know, this committee is a committee of the Regional District Board. So this committee provides advice, provides recommendations initially to the Regional District Board. The board is always within its right to say we're not going to accept that. We would hope that the board, and I think that they would, and I think that because it's going to be very open and transparent, it would provide a rationale for that. And I think there'd be an expectation that they would. I think that the province would wish to see an explanation on that because the province has funded this entire effort. I'll let David comment on that if he wishes, but that would be my understanding. I think it's certainly my argument. David, yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in there and say, yeah, the province would have an expectation from the board that there'd be some kind of rationale to explain their decision about why they're not going forward with some or all of those options. Yeah, we'd be very curious.
Thank you very much, David. Just to repeat that for folks that might not have heard, David concurred that the province would expect the regional district to provide a rationale for choosing not to proceed on a recommendation. So, and then the other, yes, I think that was we covered it. Okay.
Yes, and one point on October the 15th, it could all change.
That's correct. We have the election.
We have an election coming up, and
Yes.
if there's changes on the board, specifically in the municipalities, and I know the Lake Country's going to have to change because James is stepping down.
Yes.
Peachland was a point, so who knows what's going to happen there. And there's a lot of people running into Kelowna and West Kelowna, I believe. So we won't know until October the 16th what the board makeup is like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, very, very true. I think the other point I think to make is that one of the reasons we wanted to present the menu of options was not only to kind of, answer our mandate and to kind of fulfill our role as your advisors on this stuff, but also to ensure that all of these different ideas, all of these different potential solutions are in the public record. So all of this stuff are things that can occur irrespective of the committee's position on things. And so that's useful because not all of these options will be known to regional board or will be known to other forums. And so it's useful, I think, to kind of have it out there that there are ways to deal with this issue. Even if we don't necessarily agree on the preferred option, there are things that can be done. So we wanted to kind of present that full menu for that reason as well. Let's talk a little bit about statutory service reviews. Sherry mentioned that there's a service review ongoing right now for the fire service. That service review is actually what's called a non-statutory review. A non-statutory review is something that a lot of regional districts undertake. There's a strong tradition of them being undertaken by the RDCO, and they tend to be done about every 5 years as a matter of business. And they look at a certain, or when there are issues in a particular service, they look at a service, they assess the service in terms of its efficiency of delivery. They say we've got these costs. This is how we share the costs among participants, among jurisdictions. Is that still equitable? And the reason we do these kinds of reviews periodically is because the conditions that existed at the time when the service was created tend to change over time as populations grow, as density increases, as populations shrink in parts of the service area, as tax bases change, as people around the table, Dwayne's point a moment ago, change. All of those things, as the vision and what's important about the service changes and what it is we want to provide exactly. As those conditions change, so too at times then do the levels of satisfaction of the different participants in those services. So regional districts will often then do periodic service reviews to check in to see if there are any changes to the service that need to be done to make the service more amenable, make it more acceptable, satisfactory to the participating jurisdictions. Those are non-statutory reviews. They're done as a matter of good business. Statutory service reviews are a little bit different. Every jurisdiction in the Local Government Act, under the Local Government Act, so every electoral area and every municipality has the right to initiate a statutory service review. These can be done if that particular jurisdiction, irrespective of what the others think, if that particular jurisdiction has concerns with the regional district service at the center of that review. There's no option on the part of the board to say, no, no, we're not going to do that, because it's a legal right, a statutory right of the jurisdiction. They're not terribly common, and one of the reasons they're not common is because they have a fairly high potential to kind of be a little acrimonious at times, and they also have they can be very costly. They typically involve an independent consultant, which is awesome for us because they're costly, and not so great for you guys who have to pay for them. So, but they do actually, they are kind of useful in getting the attention of a regional body that is reluctant to look at a particular service. So that's why we put it up there. That is one way to address some of the concerns about the service. Perhaps less so about the governance side of things, but about the service delivery. That's one way to do that. Yes.
On statutory review, who determines the scope of that?
The scope of the review, so in the legislation, starting at section 357, for those of you at home, with your big textbooks open, there is a process and a set of rules that are laid out about how to conduct the review. One of the initial points in that process is to call is for the board, and they have to do this within 60 days of getting their getting the formal notice of review. That is the demand or the request for review by the, in our case, electoral area. So the electoral area director submits a formal request. The regional district board has 60 days then to respond and to schedule a what's called a capital P, capital M preliminary meeting. That preliminary meeting is the place then at which the scope is negotiated. Everybody has to agree on it. If they can't agree on it, the minister can come in and appoint a facilitator.
So again, it would be determined within the board.
Within the board, but they have to reach consensus on that. If they can't agree, the minister will come in with the facilitator, and that facilitator can then ultimately go as far as arbitration to direct what that should be.
So it wouldn't be a majority vote if one person.
The way that it works is, so every jurisdiction in a service review, every jurisdiction that participates in a service appoints one representative to the review process, to the review table, and the board appoints one representative to the board table, to the service review table. So it's not the full board, it's one person from the board, and then it's the elected official from each of the jurisdictions that participates. Or not necessarily the elected official, it could be, actually, I guess it is probably, it's not necessarily the director from a municipal council, it can be a councillor, but it's one elected representative from each jurisdiction. So it's the numbers are a little more even. And that is, again, a negotiated process. We come up with a scope. Does that answer the question, Sherry? Okay.
Did I have a question?
Well, initially, yeah. You asked about this.
No,
I thought you asked about the scope.
No, I was thinking, I was nodding. saying
Okay.
that's a
There we
good
go.
question.
Okay, to me again. Service establishment. So one of the things we found is that, as Sherry mentioned right at the outset of her summary of the public engagement, that one of the key findings from the engagement process was the finding that most people who responded to the survey expressed the view that they didn't, that the community needs more services. And so a key way then to receive those services is to create those services. There is a process in the Local Government Act that gives the local jurisdiction. And in fact, there's another process that gives electors, voters that is, not even necessarily the electoral area director, but voters. But there's processes in place then to allow the community to petition the regional district to establish a service. And so that can be done. Typically, when it's a local service like that and it's going to be paid for by the local area, the regional district is all but it has no issue to kind of create that service. It only becomes an issue then when there's liabilities that everybody else has to buy into. But when we're dealing with the services that are local in nature, typically it can be done with a petition to the board, and that's established through under the Local Government Act as a separate service. So again, this would deal with some of the concerns we heard about the desire for different services. It would not address the concern necessarily about the desire for greater influence in decision making, because if we have a local service that is unique to North Westside, all votes for that service would be the full board because we would only have one jurisdiction. It also would not address a different concern, a different point from the public information, which was, and this is quite common to see in these types of surveys, while we want more services, we don't want to pay more. So because if you establish a service, you got to pay. So anyway, a bit of a conundrum there. Now for the local community commission, I will pass over to Sharon.
So a local community commission is a specific type of commission or committee that's delegated authority by the regional district board for administration and operational decisions and spending authority within a prescribed budget over specific services that are provided to that community. So it has a boundary. The local community commission would be based on a geographic boundary that's determined, and it would oversee services. Often it's just one or two services, but it's usually the local services that are provided within that boundary. The other key points for the local community commission, the representatives, the commissioners are elected by the community, by the geographic boundary that it serves. So that usually has, or it has either 5 or 7 representatives. So usually in a smaller community, it would have 5. 4 of them would be elected. The other would be the electoral area director. They sit on the commission, so they would hear issues from the local community, usually pertaining to the services it has authority over. But the local community commissions usually sort of have a bit of an overarching, and they end up being this conduit for almost all the local communities concerned. So even though they oversee water and the sewer service and maybe parks, they'll still hear about animal control and the local roads and the other things. So it's still actually, they end up acting almost like a small municipal council or a community sort of quasi-council, where people feel like they can come and share their concerns, know that they're going to be heard by their electoral area director, as well as heard by the community. So it addresses that sort of desire for to be able to provide the local input and involve your residents. But they also have that delegated authority for decision making on some aspects of some services. So there is that sort of extra role that they can play. So the services themselves don't have to change. So again, you're not necessarily creating new services, but you're just giving the local community commission the control and decision-making authority over those services. The most obvious ones for Northwest Side, if it were a Northwest Side local community commission, would be your fire service and your water services that are within those boundaries. But you could also have a component of the park, so maybe oversee the parks that are within your Northwest Side boundaries, possibly even a component of your garbage or your transfer station, some of those types of services that are provided within the Northwest Side. Those could all come under the purview of a local community commission. There aren't a ton of, there's 5 examples, I believe, that exist today. Some of them are actually no longer being used. But there is a new one that's being created. It's in the process. The bylaw already exists. And it's being established in Salt Spring Island, which has a population of almost 12,000. So it's going to be used in an instance. And one of the reasons it's being created there is because they recently voted down incorporation. So they had an incorporation study. They decided against it. But what they thought that they would like are sort of some more authority over local decisions. So they now created a local community commission, and I think it will provide a much better example for other communities looking into this option, because a lot of the ones that exist right now, most of them are in communities that are only about 300 people or less. And one of the reasons they don't work super well is that they oversee one service. Once that service is established, the community doesn't have a lot to do, right? The administration of the water, generally, and people lose interest, and it becomes hard in a community of 300 to get commissioners elected every time. So often you have some that are just appointed. It's very similar to an improvement district at that point. They're just overseeing one service. People aren't that interested. And really that 300 like, that's not a great pool for pulling volunteers from. So you guys do have a larger population, you have an interested population, you do have services that are specific to your area. So this is one of the options that seems to address more of the concerns, both on the local decision-making authority and not just input, as well as involving residents and yeah, just having a greater say in some of those services. Questions, yeah.
Yeah, in my quest for governance over the last 7.5 years, I have gone to conferences, I talked to other electoral area directors, small municipalities, pretty much everybody that I could find and talk to. And local community commissions have almost never come up. And there doesn't seem to be good working models out there. Salt Spring Island, I know they have tried incorporation a few times. I think they might be getting desperate looking for something. But I haven't found people that are happy with a local community commission and find that it serves them well. And I'm worried again about the scope that the committee will have. Would they be making budgetary decisions? Or does that still have to be advisory in nature or go back to the full board? Any recommendations from an LCC?
They can be given the authority to use a specific budget that's assigned to them. So they could, for instance, for water, if they have their budget for water, they could choose a water contractor and pay that water contractor out of their budget. As long as they're not asking for money.
But we have
outside of that.
unionized employees on our, so how would that change that with the local community commission? I'm having trouble after the sort of the path that I've been down, understanding that they're going to turn over multi-million-dollar service functions to an LCC. I just.
Who makes the decision as to what services would be turned over to the LCC and what level of authority does the LCC have within those services? That's, I think, the big question.
So, yeah, so the regional district does need to create the LCC. It is like a establishment of a service. So the whole board would have the opportunity to vote on that establishment bylaw. You have to create a bylaw to create the LCC and delegate out what services they would have authority for. So again, the board would have to be in favor of that idea. Usually it is brought forward from the community asking for it. And then both the board, so just like any service that's established, it would be a corporate unweighted, so each person gets one vote on establishing that service. And then the community actually gets to vote on it. It would be a referendum on whether it's supported by the community.
The concept of the LCC would be voted on by the community, but still it's the board that's going to determine what services they would be prepared to turn over and what level of operational control they would have. And that's probably the biggest issue that we always have is just lack of cooperation, lack of hearing our elected official. I don't know how we can change that.
Well, Wayne made a good point, which was that, it is a body of the regional district. So the regional district is the legal entity in this regard. So a local community commission is not a separate legal entity. So it's a body that is given through a delegation bylaw a certain amount of decision-making authority by the regional district board. The board remains in control ultimately of those services because, as Wayne mentioned, some of them are quite pricey and some of them have assets involved, and the whole board as the regional district corporate entity, the corporation, is ultimately liable for those services. So they will delegate, they're able to delegate under the legislation, they're able to delegate certain decisions. They can also delegate to the local community commission the authority to make recommendations on the budget, the annual budget, and to make recommendations on acquisitions of materials and equipment. They can't delegate those decisions to the local community commission. So
we kind of come back to the point, and I know, I understand that, everything you're saying, Scott, and we kind of come back to the point that in all of these, within the framework options, they rely on a certain willingness on the part of the regional district to make these work. So if the concern on the part of the committee is that there's not, that if you're concerned that that willingness is not going to be there, even given changes that we may see in membership, even given change in circumstances and all that kind of thing, then yes, you're not going to be satisfied with these kinds of changes within the system. If, on the other hand, you feel that as a result of this process, which is very public and there's a public record, and we kind of, you know, the province has been behind this both financially and in terms of providing support and oversight, if you feel that with all of that that's occurred, and where we are today in our relationship with the regional district here in the north, from the northwest side, that there is a new opportunity to work with the regional district to make some changes within the system using one of these kinds of options, then it may be something to consider.
If you, as the consultant,
Yes.
would you consider LCC compared to an electoral area governance committee as the ability to represent the community, which would serve best? Out of those, just those two right now.
It's, let me kind of answer it this way. I think that both bodies, and by the way, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both.
Yeah.
And please, so if we look at the Capital Regional District, they have an electoral area services committee, and they're going to be creating a local community commission.
Things move slow enough as it is. Put more
Anyway,
lots in there.
They're kind of two different animals. So the Electoral Area Services Committee is going to be making recommendations to the board. It doesn't make any decision making, doesn't have any decision making authority. The local community commission would be in a position to make far fewer recommendations, to have a more refined and defined scope and a smaller scope than an Electoral Area Services Committee, and would make certain decisions on the services that are assigned to it. And so it would have tighter parameters, but it would have some decision-making authority within those parameters. I think, given what we've heard about the Northwest side and from the Northwest side, about some of the concerns about influence in decision-making, I think the Electoral Area Services Committee could do a very effective job at having a very kind of a broad look at governance overall for the electoral area for the Northwest side.
And
it brings in more people to the tent, and it creates a very effective forum in which to have those discussions and make those recommendations. The local community commission won't have the same clout as the Electoral Area Services Committee, but it'll be very effective if the focus is on, we've got 3, 4, 5 services that we're really concerned about, and the rest we're less concerned about. We want to have eyes on the services that are local, and we want to make some decisions on those services in the community.
And of course, the LCC, like board, is dependent upon who's elected to it.
Absolutely, yes. So yes, yeah, and so that's true, and I guess that's the careful what you wish for in our entire democratic system. Yeah, look at Trump.
Don't think he's elected.
So how do we go about getting a local community commission set up that has authority over specific services?
Yes. The way that we would proceed on that is, Sherry has mentioned, if we look at the Capital Regional District in the Salt Spring Island, the proposed Salt Spring Island Local Community Commission, the regional district ultimately has to put together all the bylaws and stuff. The province, and I'm going to ask David to chime in here, the province would be a body that would provide support in that process and kind of in helping the parties identify what those services should be and how this is going to come together. And I think the province would want to be involved and would be involved because, as Wayne pointed out, there just aren't a lot of these animals yet. And so we're still kind of learning this a little bit. David, I don't want to put words in your mouth there, but is there anything you can add there from the ministry's perspective?
Yeah, so in terms of Capital Regional District and working on their LCC, there were some questions that went back and forth, although Capital, well, I was saying being one of the bigger regional districts out there, was more than happy to kind of go through this process on their own. But certainly we have staff available to have discussions and aid in this. And the history of local community commissions is really interesting in terms of like when it was made, the idea behind it was that it could provide a level of a step up before incorporation. So for those areas that, as is mentioned in the draft report, for those areas that don't quite meet all the criteria for incorporation, but really do have a strong community, an involved community, and do have either an interest in and or concerns over services, this local community commission was, we think, in terms of the province, is a really good step towards having a lot more control and control and involvement in those services for that smaller area. And as also, as Sherry mentioned, the real drawback for those 5 LCCs that are existing, even though 2 are somewhat non-functional, the real issue there is that lack of enthusiasm. So they started off strong, usually with only 1 or 2 services, and then just over time, there's just been dropping interest in that. So that's been the challenge. So in Northwest Side, it seems like everything up to date now would be that the community is strong, wants to be involved, wants to remain involved, and so this could certainly be, I think, a good. Well, I want to say it could be a good, worthwhile experiment because it's established by a bylaw and it's also repealed by bylaw. So the electors would have to also vote to repeal the LCC, or not to disband the LCC. Pardon me. So it could be also at some further future point decommissioned should other solutions or ideas come up.
Thank you, David. That's excellent.
Do you know how long the LCCs have been in existence? When were they formed? When did they form? So 34 years ago?
I think the first one was formed in 1979.
79. Okay, so over 40 years ago, and there's only been 5 of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
My concern is that even as this committee was to come forward and make a recommendation to set up an LCC and say we would like to have, control over water, fire, parks, transfer station. Who advocates after we're dissolved effectively?
Yeah.
This is all said and done. Who's going to advocate? Who's going to follow up? Who's going to make this happen? Because right now we have a situation where our electoral area director will go forward with recommendations that come from the community, and he gets basically blown away.
Yeah. This is, and we've kind of come back to the point I made a moment ago, which is that each of these options within the system does rely on the corporate entity, the regional district governing body, to ultimately be on side to kind of work with the community in developing this kind of thing. So yes, the recommendation, if the committee wished to do this, the recommendation would go to the regional district. The regional district then would want to work forward either on its own or with some hired help, and in conjunction with the electoral area director to engage the community to kind of get a sense as to what's going to be important to put within under the purview of this group. So it does. And as we're seeing with the Salt Spring Island example, and if you look at the bylaw there, it's a very robust set of services and issues that have been assigned in the bylaw to the local community commission. So where you've got willing partners at the regional district level and at the local level, it can work. Where you don't, it's kind of like the comment I made earlier. All of these are going to be somewhat frustrating. Right.
The question is within framework options, they're positive, possibly powerful. Are they the sole domain of the regional district of the Central Okanagan, or could they operate under another district?
Very good question. These could operate wherever you were, in whichever body you live. So if you had a local community commission and you decided then at some point with as a part of another study to change regional districts, the commission could go with you. You could have an electoral area services committee in a different place. All of these things could apply in any regional district. And in fact, do apply in many regional districts.
Just because everyone's really interested in this whole community commission, the commissioners would be elected, right? But volunteer positions.
Correct.
So no stipend, no payment, just let's volunteers for free.
And I think they're compensated the same way that directors are for attending meetings.
Okay.
And just not important.
Yeah.
Yes. So you'll get a stipend for a meeting, but not the big pay. Yeah. Not Wayne's huge salary. Yeah.
We get all the community complaints.
I just think that's an important thing to.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, Carrie, because as David mentioned, and as Sherry mentioned before David, the kind of the shortcoming, I guess, and really the death knell of these, of many of these that have been tried in the past, has been the fact that you just can't get people to run to be a commissioner. It's you know, and as Scott says, you kind of, you're the lightning rod for all the issues. You don't get paid except when you attend a meeting, and yeah, you've got maybe it wouldn't be the most attractive job in the world. I don't know.
So Alan, if I may, the way I see this is the local committee being equivalent to a citizen advisory board body, but with some teeth.
Yes.
And so long as it is delegated enough tasks by the board, then we should probably have enough activities that the community will become complacent. Just, and if you have support by the province in developing scope of what we is tasked with, but would you also then have the ability to have some follow-up support in the event of conflict, whatever that may be?
I think there is always the potential for those kinds of appeals in areas of conflict. I know there's not maybe a formal avenue, but I do know that, for example, I've been hired in the past to work ironically in RDNO to help them resolve conflict around kind of local services. So with the board, conflict between local areas and the board. So there is, and that was funded by the province. So that was, it's not a program per se, but it is the province as being the body ultimately responsible for the proper, efficient operation of the local government system wants to kind of help where it can to resolve issues that will help the system work better.
So there is an opportunity to have some outside support if either you're not behaving in the LCC or the RTCO is not behaving.
Yes.
Amicably with each other, the province will at least be able to step in from time to time and say, hey, let's sort this out. Let's adjust it like this, adjust it like that. An outside voice of reason a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's, and again, not wanting to put words in David's mouth here, but I think I'm going to hold the province to task here. But I think that the province is reluctant to instruct local entities to do different things, but the province has a strong history and tradition of kind of playing the role of honest broker and facilitator of solutions. So they won't want to come in and instruct and kind of direct an outcome, but they may want to come in and say, there is a case to be made here. And typically that's something that sets a bit of a precedent that others can learn from. There's a case to be made here to come in and help facilitate a solution. Is that fair to say, David?
Yes. Yes. Sorry. I was just looking at the local community commission guide I don't think there's a link there, but so before when we were talking about statutory service reviews, that's done by the planning and land use. Should the ministry get involved, it involves the planning and land use department. And I was just trying to see if LCC would be considered a service or not, as compared to a bylaw establishing a commission. And I don't think it is a service, so I don't think that would come into play in terms of a formal dispute resolution system being available. However, that aside, yes, so the governance and structure branch helps out local governments wherever we can in terms of supporting whether it's issues they have arising or conflicts between members that we might be able to provide some advice to. not being lawyers, of course, but just providing good natured advice for everybody to work together. As Alan mentioned, though, what we are not is, or what we try not to be rather, is any kind of hammer coming down on anybody, whether that be a commission or a regional district board or municipal council.
Thank you, David. You know, and maybe I could just, if I may, Mr. Chair, just with the risk of droning on too long about this, I'm sure we'll do my rules here, but I think that if we think about regional districts and as a form of local government, if we think about regional districts in British Columbia, they are based on the premise of kind of collective cooperative action and decision making. It is a federation, you'll recall we mentioned several times over the course of the study. Regional districts are federations of different jurisdictions that come together and make decisions together, resolve conflict together, and find ways to work together. The whole system, therefore, and all of these options that would be implemented within the system really is predicated on the idea that people are coming to the table to find solutions. If we're in a situation where that doesn't exist, then we need to change the system.
And I just wanted to add one thing too, and I mean, if you read through all the literature on local community commissions, one of the things that they highlight is that it's usually a benefit to the regional district to have one, because then they are dealing less with those individual concerns and complaints, and because a lot of those community members that might be having concerns or complaints or issues with their local services are no longer coming to them. They're going to their local community commission. And that's one of the reasons you're creating it. But honestly, it helps the regional district in terms of resources and always having to respond whether or not they do. I mean, that becomes a bit of the LCC's role. So usually a local or a regional district is supportive for that reason alone. You know what I mean? Like, this is actually helping us out and helping communicate with these residents and taking some of the burden from us. So that's one of the things they highlight. I mean, less so maybe in a community of 300, but in a community that might be a bonus.
One thing that was mentioned there is planning. Planning is not an issue in Northwest side. There are no fringe area agreements up here. The planning stuff is determined by myself and the other electoral area director on the other side, and no issues there at all. Where I have concerns is with the LCC being put forward right now. Okay. I really would like to see the committee come up with a single request. And right now, what seems to be at the front is whether or not we can do electoral area boundary change to the north and a study that is involved in that. If you want a local community commission, you got an election coming up, might change things on the board here, might be something that we could bring up, and I can bring that up at any time, and bring it forward. If we were to do the study and end up in the north, I believe that you would get a far better local community commission if there was 6 electoral areas sitting down, discussing it. What is good for this area is good for the other area. They're going to have some interest in it as well. Right now, we do a local community commission. I'm going to sit down at 4, and there are going to be 11 municipal members who aren't really interested in listening to it, and 1 person from the other side. And it's an argument that is very difficult to make. Like I said, I speak once every 13 times. That could be 45 minutes between addressing points that have been brought up. And that, but I do believe that we would be far better served by just putting a local community commission off to the side for a second, go forward with 1 good, solid, strong recommendation to the regional district. Once we were either successful or not successful in that, then we could definitely look at a local community commission wherever we were. And that could be brought up at that time, but to put it in motion now, I think is a distraction. I think it takes away from the stronger issue that seems to be in the community, which is let's explore what's happening in the north and try and get that information. For instance, I didn't know that we had an increased crime rate in our area until I got the RCMP report from the North Okanagan Regional District Board and read it. Now, that was delivered to their electoral area committee, where all 5 directors that are served by that RCMP detachment, as well as us, all got to ask questions. I just get to read the report. So, yeah, I really think that that would be the best path for us as a committee, but with me.
I have a question about the statutory services review. Now, you said it would be paid for by the residents, the area residents of the electoral area?
The costs are shared by the electoral area residents and the board and any other jurisdictions that are involved. Yes.
I think the service review we've got going now is being paid for by the entire board. The last 2, and we've had 3 in the last 5 years, have been paid for by the electoral area.
And those were, what were those service reviews on? What services were that?
That Pomax was the first one, and then there was a Gardner report.
And were those, so those were non-statutory reviews?
I don't believe the board, I believe those were billed back to the electoral areas.
Yeah, so if they were reviews done within the context of an existing service and they weren't initiated under the statutory provisions, then it's paid for by the service.
Okay.
But in this case, where there is the notice given pursuant to section 357 of the act, then it's cost sharing.
Only ask because you consultants are expensive.
Yes, I
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Hold on.
Where's that revisit?
So if it gets paid for by the electoral area residents, like partially paid for whatever, is it required some sort of vote or something like this? Do the residents have to, is there some way to ensure that the residents want this statutory review? Because obviously it's going to cost them. There's how I'm trying to ask.
Yes, I do. No, it's up to the elected official to initiate it. And presumably, especially in a community this size, the elected official is going to have a good read on the pulse. And would not presumably proceed to initiate it if that support weren't there. I think, but then if the review results in changes to the bylaw, then those have to receive the assent of the electors, which can be done directly at the referendum or counter petition, or they can be given by the director on behalf of the electors.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Wayne has given us a good segue into the next component there. So if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll move on and talk about changes to the framework. There are fewer of these. In fact, there are only 2 that cover here. The first is the regional district boundary change. So as we stated a number of times over the course of the study, so I'll deal with this quite briefly. One significant change that could be pursued to address the concerns that have been raised over the course of the study in the public information program would be to change or to pursue the changing the boundary of Regional District Central Okanagan to exclude Northwest Side and thereby to place Northwest Side, the community, into the Regional District of North Okanagan. A study would need to be undertaken to do that. So a recommendation for this option would then go forward to the RDCO by the committee if the committee wished to pursue this. It would go forward to the RDCO. RDCO then would receive that, would consider it, would need to pass it on to the ministry. The ministry then, if it concurred with the value in that and wished to support that, the ministry, with a request from RDCO, would then approach RDNO, RDCO, ensure that both players wish to participate in a study that looked at what a boundary change would mean for the 2 regional districts in terms of costs, in terms of service provision, in terms of governance, all the implications for the Northwest Side, but also for the other regional districts on that. So this study would really kind of give all the information to the Northwest Side, but also to RDNO as to what would happen, what would the impacts be if that change were made. And that would be important for all parties to understand, because that would pave the way then for a decision to be made by the parties to say either we're going to do it or we're not going to do it for whatever reason. The upside, I suppose, if we can say of this kind of study is that it would deal with a number of the issues that we have identified and we've heard over the course of this study from residents. One is we wouldn't have in our DNO the potential for the largest jurisdiction to dominate votes at the regional board table that were corporate in nature or even weighted in nature on matters like budget and so forth. It's a much more diffuse distribution of power at the RDNO board than it is at the RDCO board. Another issue is there would be an increase in the level of local involvement in and influence over local decisions because you've got that more distributed sense of power, and also because you've got groups like the Electoral Area Services Committee of the RDNO in place already, and you've got 5 other electoral areas and 2 or 3 very small municipalities there as well. Yeah, with the difference, there's 4 municipalities, but 2 of them in particular are very small. Okay.
4 small ones, 2 big ones.
Okay, yeah. Lumbee particularly small, and Enderby too.
Well, actually, we're bigger than we know.
I don't doubt that, yes, yeah. And another concern then, the service concerns we talked about, because you've got more mechanisms and more voice there than you do here, you would get more of an ability to deal with those service concerns. One could make the argument as well that because they have the 5 electoral areas there, and because the regional district also provides more services to the small municipalities as local services than RDCO provides to its member municipalities, that there is almost by definition more of a focus in RDNO on the local government role than there would be at RDCO, which is more of a regional governing body, and that's its strength. Another concern, I think, or another benefit perhaps, is it just speaks to that sense of connection that we've heard about and we saw in the public feedback that seems to exist between North Westside and RDNO and the communities of RDNO. And then finally, simply the geographic location of North Westside and the fact that, the newspaper here is the Vernon Morning Star, the RCMP is based in Vernon, and there is that kind of, one could say, almost kind of natural connection in that sense from a service perspective and just a geographic perspective. So there's all those things to consider on how that could address those concerns. The downside would be careful what you wish for. You never get it's the same issues that you've experienced, or the same perceptions, the same concerns that have been voiced here in this regional district could easily happen in that regional district. I mentioned at a meeting a while back that for many years RDNO was not kind of, and I think that they'll forgive me for saying this because it's well documented, was not the poster child of great art regional districts in the province. Let's just put it that way. There were many, Vernon had initiated 19 statutory service reviews at one point. There was a tremendous amount of conflict there. Keep in mind also, in terms of careful what you wish for, you're a very high assessment base here. You'd be joining areas with much lower assessment bases. So that may work for them because you would then be paying into services at a greater kind of relative rate than maybe you would here. So there's all these kinds of questions to take into account. You don't know the answers of all these things until you do the study. And so that's one thing. The big part there is if you don't kind of get the willingness on the part of the regional district North Okanagan to join the study, to undertake the study with you, the option's dead.
As an electoral area though, wouldn't the big ticket item in a move like that be your health district?
You could,
Well, we're already paying for the fire department and all the rest of the services anyhow, so
yes.
the fire department's not gonna get more expensive going in order.
Yeah, there's going to be, they've got a number of other regional services that we don't have. I don't have the full, the names of frames. We've got a slightly different mix. The health authority is not a given that you would change the health authority. You probably would, but it's not a given. The hospital district, I should say.
Go with regional district.
There are some cases in the province where we don't have contiguous boundaries. We don't have the same boundaries.
So that's the hospital we're gonna end up in.
Yes, and it probably already is. So yeah.
It already is.
Yeah, so that's something that it's a little bit out of our purview. I can't give advice on that, on what would happen, but it would be a process. It wouldn't be an automatic, it would be a process.
Yeah.
So Al, you could, with a little bit of research, report on what tax impacts Westside versus and that would take very much.
Well, the way that these studies are typically done, I'll kind of call on David again to chime in with his wisdom on this a little bit if I could, but the way that these studies are typically done is they follow a very prescribed format and process in the same way ours has. And there's going to be a little bit of a deep dive in terms of really understanding what services are in place today in our jurisdiction and what services are in place today in that jurisdiction. That would include our local services, the sub-regional services we participate in and we help to pay for and help to govern, the regional services, all that stuff that we've looked at a little bit, but we want to look at a little bit more from in terms of cost. And then looking at all of those services that we would be joining, we have to identify, well, what are the assumptions we're going to make in terms of which services we're going to join? Would we be our own electoral area or would we join electoral area B? That assumption would need to be made. Well, this is careful what you wish for. So, so all of that could be done. It would take a bit of time, is what I'm getting at.
Well, that's, I guess, it all boils down to how much is this going to cost? I mean, if all center taxes go up to 50%, I don't think it's going to happen. If it's similar or plus or minus 5%, I don't think there's a problem.
Yes, no, the dollar has a wonderful way of sharpening the mind and David, I wonder if I can, you've turned your camera on. Thank you for that. And I wonder, is there anything that maybe you can offer in terms of process if a study were to occur and how that would, anything at all there to add?
I can add that I don't have any experience in terms of change happening between regional districts. There have been electoral area boundary changes within regional districts. They're not frequent, but they do happen. The study would likely be framed, not exactly the same, of course, but using basically the same structure in terms of reference between all the parties involved. I could not actually say what the scope would be. I would caution to have any in terms of costs. I mean, whoever consultant would be hired for this study would likely examine and could look at possible tax implications and cost implications, but of course there'd be nothing really certain unless there was a deep dive, and that would influence the grant amount as well. So basically my answer is, it's definitely possible. What it would be involved, I think, would be a conversation in terms of what's in the terms of reference.
Great, thank you, David. Okay, yes.
Are there any precedents to this happening?
So interestingly enough, I think my very first study as a consultant was, and I was much younger, was in the Fraser Valley, where there 3 regional districts were amalgamated into one. And so that was a fairly ambitious undertaking that, as David kind of just referred to, involved a lot of cost analysis and governance analysis and that kind of stuff. That was a little bit and much bigger than this undertaking would be. There aren't that we actually, Sherry and I did look at another instance within the Metro Vancouver area of one jurisdiction municipality actually that wished to change regional districts. It undertook it on its own. It wasn't a sanctioned study, but it wanted to understand the implications before it pursued a legal course in changing regional districts. So, and that actually the study occurred, and it was undertaken. It took a little bit of time. All the data was looked at, all the numbers were looked at. The change was never actually pursued because, to Dwayne's point, as numbers started to come to the surface and other implications started to become known, the jurisdiction in Metro Vancouver decided they could get along after all. So yeah, the numbers did speak in that instance for sure. So there aren't, but to Eric's point, there aren't a lot of, as David mentioned, he's not aware of any, and I can't think of any other big boundary changes in regional districts.
Just in general.
Yeah, there have been, I mean, Metro Vancouver has, if we look at Metro Vancouver over kind of a number of years, it did expand its boundary repeatedly. So it kind of took in Maple Ridge, it took in the Langleys, all that kind of stuff, but that's almost ancient history now, so.
I was going to say, in terms of some changes in terms of electoral areas, there was in RDOS, there was a study done in 2016 for Area D that was then split into D and I based on the outcomes of that study. In terms of electoral area boundary changes within the regional district, Mount Waddington 4 years ago, had a fairly massive change amongst all 4 of the electoral areas to have a more equitable population redistribution so that each EA was a bit closer in population numbers. And I think Fraser Valley may have had an electoral boundary change between 2 electoral areas recently. I'm not 100% on that one. So it can happen. They're uncommon, which is why, again, the initial discussion to really frame out the scope in the terms of reference would be truly important, as well as, of course, having all the participants wanting to be involved.
Yes, and thank you. That's a really good point about participants emphasizing that needing to be involved. There was also in the early 2000s, kind of 2005 or so, and there was maybe a little bit later than that, there was the in the Comox Strathcona Regional District, that split into 2 different regional districts. So there was that, and we kept Comox Regional District and Strathcona Regional District now. So that's probably the closest one, but that was much bigger because it involved different municipalities, different areas. So maybe it's kind of exciting in the sense that it could be breaking new ground. So, but yes, and I think that given that we're dealing with a smaller area and a kind of a more defined scope here, it would be much less ambitious than some of the examples we raised.
Yeah, I think that any.
Oh, Callie, sorry,
Go ahead.
Haley.
So I'm just curious, so if this study was to go forward, who makes the decision on the changes or the results?
The province will ultimately.
Okay.
So, well, there would be, now there doesn't have to be a vote, but I suspect there would be a vote in these cases. I suspect that there would have to be, well, maybe perhaps not a vote. I mean, the legislation, I had a look at it, and again, David can chime in if he wishes, but my reading of like, David, did you want to chime in at first before I say something that might be wrong?
Ultimately, it's the minister that agrees or disagrees with whatever the board puts forward as a recommendation. Historically, minister has agreed with the recommendations, unless for some reason there's an issue, and then it goes back to discussion. So in terms of like the process, so just similar to this study, there would, well, actually, sorry, I am not sure if it would be similar to this study in terms of whether or not it would have a committee or it would just be a consultant hired to do work. That's another open question, I think, for the initial discussions behind this. But in the end, whatever, if it's a committee or consultant, the study would be complete, recommendations would be given toward the boards, pardon me, in this case, at least 2 boards. And then if there's consensus, that would go to the province for action. And again, most of the time, if the province sees that all the participants are, okay with it, they've been involved, they're okay, they've put forward the recommendations, the minister would very likely support that.
So there wouldn't necessarily then, David, be any kind of public assent, any citizen assent, elector assent?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, that is a really good question. So, pardon me, when it comes to the actual change, the minister may agree with the recommendation and then would, this I'm uncertain about, but would very likely require elector assent from the residents for that change to happen. That would make the most sense and also the most democratic sense in terms of how these larger changes happen.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me because we're dealing with a fairly large population here, like in other words, more than a couple hundred. We're dealing with 2,500 people here in the Northwest side. We probably would have some kind of assent process for that group.
Sorry, did you say it would go to a vote?
Referendum.
Likely go to referendum, yes. Yeah, that, but again, I think one of the points David made though is that the minister would need to instruct that. Yeah.
What's the length of this process?
I think that the length of this process is going to depend on the scope, and that is something I think, as David has intimated, that is right now a little bit up in the air and would have to be studied and have to be kind of agreed on by the 2 groups. It could be, if we look, it would be long. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it would be longer than this process, but probably shorter than a full incorporation study. Well, it could be. It could be anywhere between I'm gonna say anywhere between a year and 2 years.
I'm working on this for 7.5 years. One thing that I think that is going to happen for anything is obviously the Northwest side is going to want to know what cost implications there are for them.
Absolutely.
Nord is going to want to know what cost implications are there for them. And Court is going to want to know what this is going to cost them, because there's 2,900 people in this electoral area, and if we take 2,500 up there's going to be some serious ramifications back at the board table.
Yep.
So we're going to have to get a study that includes everybody and gets us costs.
Yep.
And then we can determine that. Now, I know you think that the length of time would be longer, but I don't understand it, because the next one is more financial in nature. And all that information is already sitting with 2 regional district offices for them to go in there. It's like a 2017 study. The information they needed is already there on file. And I think the next study is going to have the sort of public input aspect to it, because we're going to have to get this financial information and then give it out to everybody else. So Nord gets it, we get it, the rest of the regional district gets it, and understands it.
And you know what, Wayne, you could be right. And I think this David's point was that we're a little bit on uncharted territory here, or in uncharted territory. And so would there be a committee struck? That's something to consider. If there were a committee struck, because as I think a few people have suggested, this is going to be important to the community, obviously. So if a committee were struck, that's going to add to time and process. If it weren't struck, that would make it a little more streamlined. So it really depends on how it's structured and how the ministry, which ultimately is going to be the determinator, or the obviously going to make the decision.
Could we continue with this committee?
This committee will end at the end of this, at the end of, on the 26th.
I know.
Yeah.
It's just gonna get everybody up to speed.
Yeah, and I think that
You can reapply.
yes, I absolutely reapply if the province decided to strike one. Yes, David.
Sorry, I just wanted to be clear, and just looking up for my own clarity as well. For those curious about this option, you can look at the Local Government Act, Section 43, which talks about regional district amalgamation, division, and reorganization. And in this case, it'd be reorganization. And just looking at what the requirements are, it's just on the recommendation of the minister that Lieutenant Governor in Council, which is Cabinet, may. So minister can do it at any time, really. The minister would need to be informed about the consequences to both regional districts. So that's where the study, I think, would come in to inform the minister on that decision. But just from what it looks like, it would not require any kind of elector assent, according to strictly by read legislation. Now, as part of the scope and talking about it, we would very likely, and as we just heard, sounds like everybody would very likely like to have at least some kind of local area decision made before it would, the minister would go ahead and recommend that happening. Another thing, just in terms of timing for Director Carson there, actually two things. One, it does say that the minister our minister has to consult with the minister responsible for the Hospital District Act to let them know that that boundary alteration will happen, just to try and weave together a regional district and hospital district boundary change at the same time. And because of that, there's another specific restriction legislation here, which says letters patent, which is the birth certificate of regional districts, where it lays out their boundaries and electoral area boundaries. Those can't be changed and issued for 6 months after that notice is given to all the regional districts and to the Ministry of the Ministry of Health, really. So there's already that window in there, basically, and my assumption for that window would be to at least give the Ministry of Health 6 months to kind of do their work to alter their hospital boundaries at the same time, and perhaps also to have some more thinking go on, perhaps. But yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there. So Local Government Act, Section 43, if anybody wanted to look for finer details. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
I actually did speak to Minister Collins about 3 months ago at a conference, and he did sort of more or less imply that he had the authority to make it happen. And he was not going to commit as to whether or not a referendum would be required, but I think they can do a referendum as well if they so choose. But
Minister can
the
always-
minister has the authority.
Yes, absolutely.
According to him.
Yes, I mean, the only, sorry, sir, the only caution I would maybe make if we're talking timelines and how quickly things can move is that, it's the old saying, best laid plans, right? I mean, things always take longer than we think they're going to take. And especially as David's just suggested, when we have more than one ministry involved and we have more than one regional district involved, then we're going to want to have the study because the minister. Yeah, well, yeah, it's not something to be kind of done overnight, but it also is something that can be done, it's not going to take forever. How's that for a range?
Yeah.
That's how we're paying the bucks. Yeah, can we just do that one other one? Just to fill out, we're just kind of on dessert here, we got to fill the whole menu. So we'll do this, Sherry, go ahead. And then okay.
Okay, we'll touch on this last one, and we've talked about it a little bit, alluded to it a little bit in our discussions already, but the other change to the framework would be to change the electoral area boundary. So that would be a change within regional district of Central Okanagan, wouldn't affect the outside boundary, so it wouldn't go into North Okanagan, but you could change the boundaries of Central Okanagan West. You could divide it into two. You could create a Northwest Side electoral area. So you have 3 electoral areas. All of those would be up for, all of those could be options. So we just wanted to highlight the fact that you can change the electoral area boundaries themselves. And even David has given a couple of examples of where that has happened. Some of the pros and cons of doing that, if you created your own electoral area for the Northwest Side, for instance, you would have your own electoral area director that is just serving that area on the regional district board. It could also then change the board dynamic a little bit. We talked about earlier about how the voting is changing. Voting strength is changing with this election. So in October of 2022, the city of Kelowna will have, it'll be 6 of 12 on the regional district board. If there was an extra electoral area, they would actually have 6 of 13. And then on corporate votes where everyone has 1, they no longer have a majority. In fact, they don't even have 50%, so they can't even veto something. So having an extra electoral area would have some other implications other than just serving the Northwest Side, but you can change those boundaries. It could have some implications for costs. Again, you would be making a recommendation for to the province and to the regional district board to undertake another study. So again, there would still need to be that second study that looks at what would those changes be, how would it change services, how would it change maybe weighted stakeholder votes, because for a service like parks that just provides the Central Okanagan West, if you divided that into 2, now you have 2 electoral areas that have that service, maybe you have some weighted stakeholder votes then. So there are all those implications that would be, that extra study would look at. The costs are probably not great. The additional costs are probably not that much greater because you're probably just adding 1 electoral area director. It's not a huge extra cost, but anyway, we just wanted to highlight that as an option. Would it address extra local input? Maybe a little bit, extra representation for the Northwest Side, a little bit, but not a big change to any of those services. Wouldn't address some of the things like the relationship with the Vernon or some of those extra issues that we had identified. It doesn't change those, but anyway, we wanted to highlight it as a potential.
I would like to address that potential option. The 2 electoral areas within the regional district right now can barely pay the bills with the people that they have. In electoral area west, we have 2,900 people that pay taxes to the regional district, and I represent. We have 12 to 15,000 people in our area that live on IR 9 and 10 that have local government, and it is West Bank First Nations is their local government, chief and council. And I don't speak to any of their issues or anything, but they do vote in this area. And it's makes it extremely difficult, especially in election time. But the costs, I don't think this regional district, because it'd be 400 people left if you turn Westside into a regional district. There'd be 400 people left in electoral area west, and they're not gonna pay for a director. They're not gonna pay for expenses. They're not gonna pay for any of that stuff because there's not enough people to do that. And the east side hasn't seen a lot of growth in the last one. I think they're still around 4,000 people.
Yeah, not the same growth that you had.
Yeah, well, we had huge growth here, right? We were 45.5%, and most of that was right in the northwest side here. But I don't see ever I see possibly them going to one regional district, but.
Well, and that's like, that's the other
And it's
thing,
gonna
again.
And it's gonna be placement of West Bank First Nations, where do they go now?
Right.
Right, because
Yep.
they have to
Yep.
be represented, but their numbers are just huge, and that's not even counting the development, the full Ferry Wharf Road. So they're growing faster than us, probably faster than us growing. And that will impact this regional, or this electoral area heavily sometime.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back and talk about recommendation. Does that answer any questions? Which guy read? This is you, right? Oh, yeah.
Back to the table, guys.
Yeah, but it looks like it wants to
Well, you're there till next Sunday.
Colin, are you still there?
It looks like he's coming back in. Oh. Oh, Sandy, I'm gonna need your help on that. What I see up there, I don't see down here. Yeah. Yeah. I know.
You know what? He's still here. He's still online, so I don't understand what's happening. Colin, are you still online? Yeah, I know. I got a different view down here, right? No, that's okay.
Oh, maybe he's not.
Is anybody online? What have you done now?
Well, let's just leave it up there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it's weird.
Yeah, hopefully he's there.
Yeah.
Oh. It looks like he's gone.
It's like everybody's gone. Yeah.
So that's probably what I want to do. Yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna unplug your clicker here.
Go ahead. Yep. Look at the screen up there.
Oh, good, thank you.
There you go. Perfect. Can you put my thing back in?
Well, I hope so. I hope it'll work.
I'm back. Sorry, I had troubles trying to get in there. I don't know what went wrong.
Can you advance? Do you need to advance it? I want to. I don't know what I did down here.
Did you put it right in the same one?
I thought I did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, bring up some sort There, I got it now.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get out of the way.
David as well. He won't be in advance and Shall we begin, Mr. Chair?
Let's go back.
Okay, so we're at the recommendation stage. I'm trying to find some comparison to some TV show, but I can't think of it, so we're at the stage. So let me just, if I may, just say a few points to kind of set the stage for the recommendation and explain how it's going to work in terms of the mechanics. And then I'll turn it over to the chair and then you can lead from there. But as we've gone now through the different options, we've identified the options, you've had a chance on your own time to look at the report, we've discussed them this evening, you've had a chance to reflect on them. We're now kind of, as the committee, doing that third part of the purpose, which is to identify and make recommendations on changes you wish to pursue, you wish to recommend to the RDCO and ultimately to the ministry. Our advice as consultants is to try to keep it relatively simple rather than have like a whole listing of different things that could be done. We know these things can be done. We've got the menu on there. It's in the public record. Try to kind of keep it simple as our advice and focus on one or two things that we really would wish to look at. We will, all the recommendation that is made along with all the other information will go into the final version of the report. That final version of the report will be distributed electronically to the committee, just to ensure that you're comfortable with the wording. And if there's concerns, then we'll figure out how to kind of broach them and how to kind of exchange information to make sure we're all comfortable. It will also then go to the RDCO board and to the province. So the actual report with everything in it will go to the province and the RDCO board.
What would be the timing of getting into the board?
We will submit that, so it's got to be on the agenda package for the board, so we can have an advance or something.
Right now, it is tentatively set as long as the regional district receives everything from the consultants to come forward on the 26th of September.
When do we need to give it to you to be on the agenda package?
Right,
Okay.
I should know off the top.
Yeah.
Sandy,
Tuesday, September 20th.
Okay, so we'll have it, we don't need to get it onto the board until the 20th, but we'll have it to the committee. Next week is going to be the week of the 12th.
It's the board I'm worried about. I know myself and other board members are really not happy when they get a 130-page document handed to you 3 days before the meeting.
Okay.
So if there's any way of getting it out to them earlier and giving them an opportunity to read it, it's more than the recommendation. It's a fairly healthy document and it would be nice to have them read it.
We will defer to the corporate officer for that one, but we'll communicate that.
If I may, the deadline would be the same as it typically would outside of what Alan's proposed with the consultant, and it would provide the board 4.5 days.
Okay,
By the time it goes out.
and is there precedent at all, Corey, for sending it out earlier than that? Or is that?
No, it's completely doable.
Okay, there we go.
As long as it goes to the entire board.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, and that will also then be a public document because it will go in the public agenda. Now, the way it's going to work then, once the recommendation is done, is submitted on the 26th, and I'll mention this at the end of the meeting as well. On the 26th, I will go with the chair and with the vice chair, and everybody else is encouraged to attend as well to the RDCO board meeting, where our committee of the boards, we go to report to the board and give that advice to the board. We'll present the report and the recommendation. The board will consider the recommendation. The province will be in attendance virtually at that meeting as well. The board will consider that and define its next steps or determine its next steps. And those next steps can be anything from do nothing with it to accept certain parts of it, to accept it all and proceed then to make its own recommendation to go to the province to, if it's required, to get support to take another step, if that is indeed one of the recommendations.
And that is a Monday evening meeting.
That's a Monday evening meeting. Yes.
Yes.
Now, before we get to any of that stage, we need to come up with a recommendation. So just in terms of the process and the mechanics on how this is going to work, because we are a committee of the regional district, so we're going to follow their general rules on that. And it's also will need for kind of an efficient way to kind of make this recommendation. What we will do is based on all of the information you've received, based on the discussion we've had, you've got a sense of where you land on these things. I will ask the board chair, or the committee chair, Scott, to ask for a motion from somebody on the committee. So invite somebody on the committee to put forward a recommendation in the form of a motion. So to move a recommendation. That motion then needs to be seconded. And if it is seconded, then the motion is on the table for discussion. The chair, Scott, will then facilitate that discussion. Typically, in these kinds of events, you get a chance to speak once, and we kind of go around and make sure that everybody's had their say before anybody else gets a second say. So I would suggest we kind of follow those protocols as well, so that everybody gets a chance, because it's a very important item. Once the chair has kind of determined, once people have spoken, that there's been enough discussion on the recommendation, could be long, it could be short, then the chair will call a vote. And that vote then will determine whether that recommendation has been accepted. There, in theory, if it is accepted, there can be other recommendations put on the floor if the committee wishes. But again, they have to be seconded and they have to be voted on as well. So we're looking really to kind of, I think, have a fairly simple recommendation going forward, and one that the committee can vote on and hopefully get good consensus around as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I will ask you then to invite a motion on a recommendation.
I'd like to have a motion on the recommendation.
I'd like to put forward a recommendation. I'd like to recommend that the RDCO, in collaboration with the province and the regional district of Okanagan, pursue a further study to explore in detail the service governance and financial implications of removing the Northwest Side area from the RDCO boundaries, with the view of becoming an electoral area within the RDNL.
I second that.
Somebody's gonna have to move it.
Yeah, so we can, yeah, and now, beg your pardon, just in terms of process, so yeah, so Josh moved it, Dwayne seconded it, so now it's time for discussion.
Now it's open for discussion.
Comment, would we want to put standalone electoral area in there, or would that be
It is,
too detailed?
I think we
I
said.
think it's just electoral area, joining orders in electoral area, and I know Alan mentioned
Becoming
joining another one.
an electoral area within RDN.
I-
So it would be an individual
Okay.
electoral area within RDN.
Others for discussion?
Mr. Chair, may I request a repeat of the motion so we can capture it?
Motion is to pursue a further study to explore in detail.
Oh, there we go.
You want to sit down here?
Right?
Explore in detail the service, governance, and financial implications.
Implications.
Of removing the Northwest Side electoral area from the RDCO boundaries, with a view of becoming
Let's clarify.
a separate electoral area within RDN. Make sense to it?
Scott, sorry, what were the three implications there?
Sorry?
There was three implications mentioned, I just, service.
Oh,
Service,
the service, governance, and financial implications.
Do we need to, it's probably a question for Alan. Would a legal implication also?
I think that's going to be implied in there. I think we're okay
Okay.
there. Yeah, because the minister will ensure that it's all. Yeah.
And a point of information, Mr. Chair, technically the Northwest Side isn't an electoral area, but I think we've captured the intent of the motion to be essentially the Northwest Side.
Yes, that's that fire protection district, I think is the official name for.
If that is the
Or the area
commitment to the
scope of
motion,
this
that's
study.
my understanding of the intent.
So does that mean the electoral area is getting its split, like the south part of that electoral area will stay with RDCO, and you're saying just move the north part of the electoral area over to the RDCO.
Correct. Well, if
That is a
exactly-
motion on the table.
If that, okay, I just wanna, that's a motion on the table.
If we're not involved in this thing.
Yeah, no, I just wanna make sure that the motion on the table.
So we've had that. Any
As the one who brought forward the motion, I would like to maybe just elaborate on why I brought it forward. I see we have an opportunity of overhauling the existing system to suit our needs, or perhaps look elsewhere for where a system is already suited to the needs of the community as raised during the public input process. We certainly have the ability of a committee here to recommend that, we divide the electoral area west into a north and south, two electoral boundaries. That in fact would change the seat composition at the electoral board, the court board. Is Kelowna and the other municipalities and jurisdictions would be receptive of that? I don't know, but that would put us into a different seat configuration at the board. Then also, we want to be pushing for an electoral area services committee, which we are aware that perhaps North has one that fits our needs. And if we were to stay here, we would want to end up rewriting all of the bylaws that we have pretty much to increase the stakeholder votes that are allowed for the directors on the east and west. Again, an overhaul of an existing system to support what we've determined as a community is something we'd like. Are we of the position we want to be telling others, this is what you should do? Or is it more fair that we perhaps look at, this is what we want? Is this an option that suits what we're looking for?
we looked at this because RDNO has, is it 6 electoral districts?
Five.
So we would be 6.
Yes.
So we're dealing with small communities and electoral areas with the same issues that we have culturally and issues wise.
4 of the municipalities are roughly our size, Spalding, Armstrong, a little bit bigger, and being a little bit small.
Yeah.
But we're pretty much right in the middle of it.
Yeah. So we just fit better within RDNO. If this study, demonstrates that it is a good fit, I think it is.
And again, to me, it opens up access to the critical services that we get as a community. As I mentioned earlier, for instance, the RCMP, they do quarterly reports to the electoral area governments. If we had issues with highways, they will be doing reports up there.
We're more in line with.
And well, they are our service contractors. They're our service deliverers, I guess is a better way. And same thing, ambulance and the rest of it. So it's just, that's where the province chooses to deliver those services from.
Okay, should we, any other further conversation on this?
Just to play devil's advocate, we are in a situation right now where we have 2,900 residents within.
2,900 in the entire central Okanagan West, aside from IR 9 and 10.
Right, so we're dealing with 2,900 residents within a regional district of 200,000.
Yeah.
If we were to shift over to the RDNO, they have a population base of between 85 and 90,000. There is dominance within that board with Vernon and Colston. And I know from talking to other regional directors from, or at least one regional director happens to be my cousin, that a lot of times they run into the same issue that we're dealing with Kelowna. They deal with the same issue with Vernon and Coldstream banding together and pushing through whatever agenda they feel should be pushed through, and not giving a lot of credence to proposals that are presented by other electoral areas.
But Vernon and Goldston are 5 votes out of 14.
That's true, but they do, so, you know, they're not. they're not-
Four from Vernon and 1 from Goldston, I believe.
Two.
Oh, I left when I was there, there was only one guy there, just the mayor.
Versus 11 out of 13 in the Kelowna area.
Yeah. I'm just saying that, you know, one of the things that Bob Clement, who was one of the original directors, brought up was that if we propose this, the city of Vernon and Coldstream may not be as open to this happening as we think they are, because us coming in as a smaller rural area would dilute their vote even more than it is right now. So that's just something to consider. That said, I still think there's more advantages to shifting boundaries than there are disadvantages.
Even if what Eric has said about the prominence of votes over there, this study will achieve a financial breakdown, governance, and what was the other topic? Services. So we have a clear basis, and it would be like if we had done like others in the corporation study, it doesn't go forward after the fact, and they back off to something that's suitable for them at that point. This allows us to look ahead, see what's there, find out what we've got, compare it. Everybody, all players get to analyze what's going on
And negotiate.
and negotiate. And I think that is, for people I've talked to, that's very important to understand where we are in the mix right now and where we could be.
But also, there may be no turning back either, right? So if the minister has the ability or the authority to make the decision, we might be in a position where we can now say, we won't be able to say, you know what, we're going to stay. They might say it makes more sense for you to move, we're moving.
I point out that the minister is going to make that kind of decision. It's going to be clear cut before he would step in and do something like that. If it's a picky situation, I don't see him doing it. Virtual politics and a lot of politicians.
The minister's not sure, I think he'll do a referendum. Because he has the authority, he'll just do a referendum if he's not sure, because why not?
It's clear cut. That's it.
Safe politics.
I like bottom line.
Do we want to vote?
Yes, I do.
Okay, by hands? Okay, for a vote for proceeding with this motion?
And last, Collins, if they.
Colin, you get to, Colin,
Yeah,
everybody
hopefully you can-
agreement here.
I'm in favor.
Okay, so this is unanimous. Okay, where do we go from here?
Well, I just maybe I can ask just if there are any other recommendations to be made.
So I'll I kind of sort of talked about it a little bit, but I've always been in support of that recommendation to go forward. So I don't think the community would be happy without getting a study and seeing what it's gonna, what it would say. So that's a good recommendation. But I'm thinking that seeing as how there's gonna be a timeline associated with that, we should kind of wrap our heads around what needs to be done now or in the future to try and make things better between the relationship with RDCO and our community, because it's fine to say we're going to have this study go on, but that could be 2 years before that happens, and it doesn't change anything currently that's happening now. The Electoral Area Services Committee, I like that idea, and I don't have an actual time so there's other people for giving some feedback, but I actually really like the statutory services reviews, and I'll tell you why I really like them. When you look at when there's any sort of dysfunction or there's people aren't getting along or there's some problems, it's, you know, you have to look at what's the elephant in the room. What's the thing that's really pissing people off? And almost in every single meeting, I'm on social media, which a lot of people know. So I see what people are complaining about on social media. I hear people come to me, talk to me. People have said, oh my God, go to Nord. I actually go to Killiney Hospital all the time, as does everyone in our community. So not everyone goes to Nord. You know, so I kind of see a little bit, but the two things that really have irked people and have caused either a perceived or actual, or have caused distrust for the relationship that RDCO has with our community and the decisions that they're making are water, because everyone's upset about the water and the cost of the water and stuff. Doesn't impact on me because, you know, we're not on any water, but that's what I hear from the community, and fire service. So those are the two things which are the elephants in the room that really are the things that really piss people off the most. So my recommendation would be that a statutory services review be requested of those two things, the water and the fire. And then on a statutory review, which I understand there is a review going on of the fire service, but it's a non-statutory, like I'm not sure what.
Is that a statutory review?
I'm not going to comment, because that's me.
Yeah, it's and I misspoke earlier. It's in the camera item, so, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, we can still make a recommendation, and then the RDCO can respond to the recommendations to the province and say we're already doing a review, right? So, but I just think that the community needs to know from an outside, impartial person, consultant, not an internal review, that says, this is what's going on with the water, this is how come the costs are up, this is this, like, it needs to be there, so the community who either has perceived or like perceived concerns that they think there's a concern, but there's actually not, or maybe there is a concern. Like maybe there is a lot of, like no disrespect, but a lot of crappy stuff going on at the RDCO when it comes to our fire service. So do a review on it, have an independent person go in and let's put these two items that seem to be the biggest bane of people's existence in this community to bed one way or the other. Either there's not a problem or there is a problem, and RDCO is held accountable to fix those problems. Like that's just my thought to make things better.
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chair? I think everything you said makes a lot of sense. So I think that there is statutory service reviews can be a very effective tool to really get to the bottom of an issue. My suggestion would be, just in terms of sequencing and timing and so forth, is that when we look at, one of the things I noted about a statutory service review is that the electoral area director always has the legal authority to, the statutory power authority to initiate one, irrespective of this study or anything else that's going on. It might be something to consider to say, the committee's got one recommendation now. If the committee went forward with that to the board, see how that played out. If the board were amenable to that and the province were amenable and RDNL were amenable and sorted out some terms and started that, that would kind of allow that to kind of get going. And then at that point, the electoral area director could always initiate a statutory review, or if that recommendation fell off the table, the review could be done too, because I guess maybe one of the takeaways is that because that's a statutory authority that every jurisdiction has, we almost don't need to make a recommendation on it, because the board has no say over whether or not, like the board can't say, well, we disagree with that recommendation. Because you can say, well, that's my right as an elected official in this jurisdiction to do that.
But I'm also, okay, so I get that, but also when it comes to accountability, like I've had a lot of questions about how is the RDCO held accountable to the recommendations that are made? How are they held accountable to ensure this? So how is Wayne held accountable to ensure that he requests the statutory services review? Like so that would just be the other side of the fence.
That's fair enough. So the committee could, you're quite right, that the committee could say, and you know, we as a committee, either in conjunction with this or at some point after that, you know, based on whatever circumstances, recommend that the electoral area director initiate that. My only concern, my only other concern, I think, maybe I would say is that, and I don't know this for sure, but just speculating and kind of a little bit of concern, if that were to go forward at the same time, I would be a little concerned that the province may look at that, and David's not with us any longer to answer this question. The province may look at that and say, well, hold on a minute, if we're gonna do that, maybe we should wait on the studies, because if you resolve those issues through those service reviews, maybe you're saying that this study is not needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then the other side of the coin is that should we be cleaning in-house before we look at moving out?
Well, but the province would say that, well, let's deal with that first, and then we'll consider this other thing.
Yeah, so anyways, that's just my.
Just to kind of lend to what Carrie was saying, regardless of how this turns out over the next 2 years, we're still under the jurisdiction of the RDCO.
Absolutely.
So how do we best go forward with, say, 2 more fire seasons still to come? If we don't employ some of those tools?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that. It's more of an open question.
Well,
I don't want to split it up. I want to have one focus, and that is on the recommendation. I agree this is an important thing, but I've been in there for 12 years, and I've seen genuine lack of interest from professionals to do anything with this. And I would just like to get the bottom line where concise, everything clear, and go from there. And if it turns out that we need some option to know about, and we can act on it. Pressure the elected representative to do it if we're north or here.
Daryl, I don't think they're competing interests though.
No.
Right?
But
Yeah,
it's
I think
distracting. They're distracting.
so is having the community burned to the ground that, you know.
No, the fire is very important, and the borough has settled it, not as much as some people have.
Right.
And it's a big, recent changes, another thing, that were brought down, again, no consultation. So I think we should focus on one resolution, clear, concise, let's find out what the heck is down at the bottom.
Is because we're just going to delay the process and
Everything. If I had a choice and I was doing 2 options, I'll take the smaller one.
So I would like to raise an issue of question. It's a question for Alan. The only reason, the primary reason that we do not request the services review of fire services and water systems, okay, would be because it is convoluting the issues with respect to the province.
In my view, it would complicate the issue. And if I were the province, I would think, okay, we're gonna let the local process go forward first before we invest in a study to look at whether we can change the regional districts.
So it becomes finally upset.
There's a cap raise.
Yeah, and I could be completely wrong, and because I think that with the both Carrie and Brian, it's a very good point. But if I put myself in the shoes of the province, I would be reluctant to invest in the time and the money in kind of proceeding with the study if local changes within the system were also being pursued to fix issues.
Would the province not want to see communities get along and make changes in the interim to ensure that communities are happy in the 2 years that it's going to take the consultants to do that? Like, I get what you're saying, but if you want to put a common sense hat on it, it makes 0 sense.
Absolutely. I just know that well, I mean, your point is correct, that in my view that the province does want to see things resolved locally, for sure, with different parties, and statutory review, even though it does tend to be adversarial, is a way to do that. And it's a power under the act, a provision under the act to allow that. when we look at, we put ourselves in the province shoes, the province has limited funds to put towards restructure studies. This is a restructure study. There are lots of restructure studies going on right now in the province, and there are lots more waiting to be funded. Again, if I'm the province with a limited purse and where I'm going to invest that, I'm probably going to let things play out at the local level before I think about investing here. I'm just giving, that's just how I read it.
And I understand that, but what I'm saying is that if there's something that could be done now through this government study that would have teeth, that would ensure that the RDCO makes some changes, the RDCO makes some changes, our community makes some changes, whoever needs to make changes to make this relationship actually work, because clearly it doesn't work. From what I've heard from, I can't say clearly definitively, from the feedback that I've gotten from the many people in these meetings and stuff, the relationship doesn't work. Like, I just don't understand why we would not put some recommendations forward that have teeth that the RDCO can't just in the beginning.
Well, I think
it's not going to solve everything, but I just anyways, I'm gonna.
Can we take a vote?
Yeah.
Well, there's no vote. There was no vote. It was just a talk.
Can I just get back? Okay, please. So I'm involved in the street. Wait a minute. So the current population component area is 200. The build out right now is 350,000. Okay. So we have to make plans in advance, 20 years in advance, to supply this. 90% of our product goes to coal, 10% goes to coal. You think it's going to get any better?
I don't remember at the table, we look at this and look at both at the same time. All it is a distraction.
It's the only aspect, not the only, but one of the ideas that I would like to put forward, though, I do agree with the well, I'll call it an audit for lack of a better word, the independent review of the fire services. The fire services, the only reason is because it affects not only our electoral area west, but it affects the electoral area east. And electoral east has problems with its fire hall. We've had problems with our fire halls. And we have a province here who at this point in time has declined to initiate a external audit of the BC wildfire and how they handled this quite late. So is there any way that we could incorporate, or are we just hurting our purpose by incorporating a recommendation?
Let's keep it clean.
Words that's simply bringing us to some province. You have a problem here that needs to be looking into. Or are these two separate matters that we just simply have to say, unfortunately, we can't be able
to address a couple of your problems, the water study, because water was a big issue. There is a water engineering comparison water study, major one going underway at the regional district right now. I mean, anxiously awaiting the results of it. I'm hoping that it will come through soon. Of course, I'm re-elected. And of course, I also have been in conversations with Ken Gillis, who's the chair of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. Both Ken and I talked to Minister Cullen at a conference a little while back, and we're both pushing for a review of the White Rock Lake fire. Currently, forestry says that it's a lightning strike and they don't investigate and actually cause fires. It grew to 85 square kilometers. That's more than a lightning strike. Hundreds of millions of dollars involved in losses and expenses. So we are going to push for that. I'm hoping that RDNO will come in. Mayor Spalmachine is quite upset with White Rock Lake fire because they're evacuated from the community and left all our animals behind and get back into the animals. So there are concerns out there. And both Ken and I, when we talked to the minister, we were looking for a complete study. We don't want it focused on BC wildfire. It needs to be BC wildfire, emergency management BC. There were 5 regional districts involved here, 9 indigenous communities. They all need RCMP and all the different services that were there. They all need to be part of this review, and we need to learn what we can from what happened that year. I know that BC Wildfire Service says that they learned lessons, giving them back to the rest of us. So we need that in our report, and I talked to the chair of our board, and hopefully at UBCM next week, we're gonna get a chance for the 3 regional districts to sit down with the minister and see if we can get a review of the White Rock Lake Fire, because it's not going away. I keep hearing it.
So the committee here, though, there's members that are asking for a statutory review of our water and our fire services. Will you request that on our behalf?
I can't speak to the fire services at the moment.
What I'm asking is, will you request the statutory review? If we're asking for it.
Yeah, if we can't get the answers, then yes, absolutely. If that's the way to go, then absolutely. I would.
Sorry, we can't get the answers for what?
Well, if the answers don't come to us, if there isn't some way of resolving the problems that we have out there in a way, then that obviously we have to go to an independent outside study to find out what's going on, and that way everybody will trust.
It's an in-camera review, none of the community won't know what the results are.
I think if an independent outside study was done at some point, that's going to go public.
But I think that's what's being said here.
That's
I
what
have to speak in abstract apparently. If the RDCO is currently conducting an in-camera review, the outcome of such review would not be available to the public. Is that correct?
I've known elected officials who are on the board, so I'm staff, elected officials may not disclose any in-camera items to those not on the board during that in-camera discussion. That's all I can say.
But is there not a process to bring that forward to the public?
Yeah, there's
Yes,
a process
that's
to bring that forward to the public, and that occurs during the in-camera meeting.
The rise in reports.
Correct.
Yes.
There is
So
a
the-
mechanism, and it happens quite frequently
Yes.
with service reviews, things of that nature, where then, once they're reviewed, then they go forward.
So it wouldn't be done and buried away somewhere, and it would,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
The
so
only
that-
time in my experience that that's happened is if it's only related to personnel matters, personal privacy.
And legal stuff.
And legal, that type of
So.
information.
I
But
would
around
think-
operational nature of service, hypothetically, no, that would come typically out in public, open public, posted on the website.
Should service.
Okay, so I'm looking at a mechanism to have this request put in place. And if it's not in the scope of this committee, appropriately for this committee, but appropriately for us to be making a recommendation, is it a mechanism that the community association can be providing a formal letter to court requesting that they conduct a fire services?
So we go to wait to
We go to
request.
the elected.
Go to the representative.
So the community association could definitely.
This is the
I
mechanism.
No, because you're the one who would be recommending it. So if you're the one who recommends the statutory, that comes from you.
Yeah, no, but he's asking for the information, and I think that would be up to the chair to release.
So if I may,
Please.
Mr. Chair, and I'll come around to this.
So everyone's trying to understand.
No, yeah, I understand, and my goal is really just to be very observant, but from a process perspective, I'm happy to share what that looks like. What I might recommend, Mr. Chair, for consideration of the committee is that a recommendation could be made for a request from the committee, go to the electoral area director requesting statutory service review of service A, B, or C. That would probably be my best recommendation. I would defer to the consultant, it's his experience as well.
But if we don't want to water down, so what I get from Alan, we don't want to put we don't want to try and fix the problem before this big review is done, because otherwise the process is going to say, clean your house first before we put any money in to look at something bigger. I get it. I don't agree, but I get it. It's silly. But I'm wondering, because my only concern is accountability, big on accountability. So if the Northwest community association then has has the ability then to request it, because maybe we won't get reelected, I don't know, but to whoever the directors at the time, that this statutory review be conducted and have it be completely separate from this one, then I think that's a good solution to moving that forward, because it doesn't water down this process, but it still meets the community's unmet needs. I'm all about like, what are the unmet needs and what is making people angry?
I think that's an elegant solution.
And I've always been receptive to anything that comes from the community. My suggestion right now would be, let's see what happens after October the 15th and what the makeup of the new board looks like, and see whether or not there's some changes there that might be to our advantage. And definitely, but
Those
this is
reviews
something
would
I
have
don't know.
nothing to do with the makeup of the board, is my take on it. Like, we have a board, would have nothing to do with the fact that this community still feels that there is entrenched problems with how fire services is being provided and the water is being provided. That, to me, that's part of that's like a step kind of from the RCO board and things they're happening. That is like a huge issue within this community, is people's thoughts on these two. And it feeds into other.
Those issues, yeah, they're entirely non-competing. One is a clear message to the province. Sorry?
It's not position, it's not a election.
No,
It's not, this is not, this is something that's
like I said 10 minutes ago, we need clear messaging from this board with respect to decisions made here. On a very separate level, we need accountability for the next 2 years with regards to potential serious considerations.
It's going to have to come through.
Right. Exactly.
Association or individuals that want to put together.
Yeah, they're independent, yeah, but they're important. Perfect.
My motion is there's no more recommendations. Other than that.
I second that. Carrie.
One other, unanimous support, no check.
Okay, if Mr. Chair, if I may then maybe move to another item. We don't have any public here to ask. Oh, we do have public to ask questions. I beg your pardon. Any questions? No.
All of that, you don't have a question?
Yes, we did. We did find out the number from, thank you very much. We did find out the number of surveys returned in the governance study for Blind Bay or for the electoral areas. There are there were just shy of 8,000 residents at the time in that area, and there were 260 returned.
It was at
2.7%, and we were looking at, we had 6% of the number of dwellings. So they had 5,000 dwellings there, so that was 4.3% of their.
They were really mad because there are big bills coming.
Mr. Chair, I'll just very briefly, September 26th, 2022, RDCO building in Kelowna, 7:00 p.m. Presentation will be made by the two of us and Josh. And it will, as I mentioned here, chair, vice chair, consultant, all committee members, welcome and encouraged to attend. And based on that meeting, then the presentation of the board will talk about the process, the findings, the recommendation, answer any questions of the board. The board will then consider its next move. Typically, that's done at the same meeting. I expect that the board will want to deal with it at the same meeting because it's the last meeting before the election. So I suspect they'll probably want to deal with it. That would be normal for them to do that based on experience elsewhere, and then they'll determine how to proceed. And it'll all be public. It'll be a public meeting, open, and public.
1450 TLO Road, lots of parking.
Yeah, and it will apply, so it cannot be, it will be on.
Or live stream as well.
It will be live streamed, yeah, it's live streamed, so it will, it's a 30-second delay. And more delay. So it will be live streamed.
And folks, we will get the recommendation that Sandy has helped to record it for us. We'll put it into the report. We'll clean up a few typos we've got here, and then we'll circulate that around in the next few days. Have a look at it. If there's something amiss, let me know right away, and then we'll fix that, and then we'll submit that to the regional district.
Is it a public document when we get it?
No, not when you get it from me. When you get it from Sandy as an official agenda package for the public.
I'll make sure that you guys know.
Yeah, I wanted to take it to UBCM.
Yes.
A motion to adjourn.
Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And next week, we're meeting to examining abolishing the monarchy. Is that?
Oh, on the
Too soon, too soon. God save the king.
I know, it doesn't sound right, does it?
For a variety of reasons.
Checks in the mail right now. Sorry? Checks in the mail. Right, yes. Well, actually, check will be in the mail on the 27th.
Extension cord. Is the blue there? The blue's ours.
Thank you.